Hi, Sophia. Is my lighting better today? I understand your dad was very concerned about my lighting. I can't really do anything about this back here because it's the door and the sunlight comes through it. And I don't have a ring light because I'm not really like a professional YouTuber. So I just have the lantern that we used when the electricity died during the ice storm. But let me know because I want to make sure, obviously, that I'm, you know, displayed to the best of my advantage for these one-on-one conversations. Okay, so I am skipping a little bit into Exodus 14 because Exodus 13 and parts of 14 just give some rules that God gives the Israelite people for when they're coming out of Egypt. And I think part of the rules, which when you first read them and we have no context for it, are just like, that seems weird. And I think it's just God's way of saying you are a separate people. You don't have to keep Egyptian habits just because you were in Egypt for a long time, because your identity there was as slaves, and I'm creating a new identity for you. So, but we're going to start at the part where Pharaoh, who is consistent if nothing else, right? Like, Pharaoh is constantly changing his mind. Like, I'm going to let you go. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, you can go. No, change my mind. Okay, just your men though. Okay, maybe just like your people, but not your animals. Like just constant back and forth. And you would think after the death of the firstborn that he would be like, nope, get out, which is what he says, right? And because God knows Pharaoh's heart and knows what he's going to do, he's like, when he says go, you got to be ready to go, because this dude changes his mind a lot. So that was why he said, you're going to eat your meal with your belt on and your shoes on your feet, because when he says go, you got to be ready to hit the road. So sure enough, that's because we're going to start in verse 5 of Exodus 14. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their mind about them and said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services." So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites, who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near Pi-hahiroth, opposite Baal-zephon. We don't speak Hebrew, so we're going to mess up these names. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water, so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen." Then the angel of God, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved from in front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to the one side and light to the other side, so neither went near the other all night long. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. Okay, so you know what I notice is how quickly the Israelites lose faith and how easy that is to happen when we get really scared. The Israelites feel trapped. They have the Red Sea on one side, and they don't have boats or anything, so they don't know how they're going to cross. And they have Pharaoh's army coming behind them, so they're caught between the army and the sea. God has a rescue plan, but they don't know that yet. And they turn on Moses and they say, oh, what, there weren't graves in Egypt? We had to die out here because what, they couldn't afford to bury us in Egypt? They get really mad and they say slavery was better than this. At least in slavery we had food. You should have let us stay there. It's really easy to get attached even to the bad things in our life because we feel like at least it's familiar and at least we know it. And that's what the Israelites had done after generations of being in slavery. They had just kind of accepted it. And part of the challenge that God has here and that Moses has here is to create a new identity for them and to say, you are not slaves. That is not your identity. That's not who you are. You are a different people. You are meant to be a free people. But freedom can be scary. Freedom is taking responsibility. And so in this moment, they are saying, we would rather have stayed slaves in Egypt. That's hard for us to imagine, right? Because we think, who would rather be a slave? But they're thinking, look, if it's slavery or death, I choose slavery. And what I love is that God, instead of being mad at them, instead of being like, haven't I proven myself to you already? Didn't you see all the works that I did? Do you think I brought you out of slavery just to let you die in the ocean? Instead, his first word to them is, don't be afraid. He recognizes that their panic and their anger, everything is just coming from a place of deep fear. And so his first words are words of comfort. He just says, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. You are going to see the deliverance of the Lord. That's actually Moses talking, but God tells him what to say. So he says, you're going to see the deliverance of the Lord. And the Lord will fight for you. You just have to be still. A lot of times we want to fight our own battles. And sometimes that's what God does, is equip us to fight the battles. And other times what God says is, I'm fighting this battle, and you just need to be still. You need to trust that this is in my hands and that I've got this. So God had been leading the Israelites in the few days that they had been leading. He had been leading them by a pillar of cloud during the day and then a pillar of fire at night so that they could still see it at night. And what he does is move the pillar, instead of being in front of them where they could follow it, he moves it behind them so that essentially it hides them from the Egyptians. The Egyptians can't see them because they can't see through this cloud. And the cloud creates darkness on their side, but because there's fire on the other side, it creates light on the Israel side. So the Egyptian army, which is coming to destroy them, essentially just can't see them. So it doesn't know what it's chasing after. And then God, and I love that God at this point says to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Because he's like, Moses, don't you know yet the powers that I've given you? You know what to do. Raise your hand over the ocean, over the sea. What I love is that I think Moses does it not knowing what's going to happen. He's like, I'm just supposed to read. What I've learned is that when God tells me to do something, he comes through 100% of the time. So let's just try this. And then the sea parts and they walk through on dry land. He parts the sea so completely that, you know how usually like when we're at the beach, even when the water has moved away, the sand is still muddy, that he completely removes it so that they're walking on dry land. All their animals, all their people, all their herds. And I think that must have been scary too, to look up and see, tens of feet, hundreds of feet above you, walls of water on both sides, and to think that could fall in on me and crush me at any moment. And that you just have to keep going. You just have to keep walking through the middle of the sea, knowing that there are dangers on either side of you, and just believing that God will carry you through to the other side safely.